Today we're going to be building this great little quilt rack. Hello everyone, Colin Canet here for WoodWorkWeb. And today that's our project. We're going to be doing some unique things with this. We're going to show you how we build or how we make a little heart, a simple way of making a little heart, decorative heart for the end. And we're also going to be using some things like little wooden buttons on the end. And you'll see why and how we use that. We're going to be doing some unique changes to the inside here. We'll talk about that later on. And we're going to finally finish this in a little bit different finish than what we've traditionally been using. So lots of different things in this video. Stick around and see how we build this great little quilting rack. Now before we get started today, let's talk briefly about design. Now most quilt racks that you see look like this. If you look at them from the end, they look like this. Then if you could take an x-ray through, there'll be a bar or a thing here, and this is where the quilts are laid on like this. Now this design is fine, but if you look around at where most quilts are stored, unless you have a store or something where you can actually walk around, because the eyeball is looking like this, what you can only see is this and this. This quilt is actually hidden behind. So if we take some elementary design, we can rearrange that to look like this. So taking that same kind of design, if we do something simple like this, if we know, for example, that most quilt racks in a residential situation are going to be against a wall, and most of them are, then the back can be a straight line. Then you still need a stand for it to be on, but now that can cascade something like that. And now you can put a rack here, a rack here, and a rack here, and now when your eyeball is looking down, you can actually see all three of them. So it's actually a much better design. But now we can take this and make this a little bit more, because we're woodworkers, we can make this a little bit more elegant. And here's what we can do with that. Let's go to a different color. If we take this, we could, because there's three bumps, we could actually draw something like this and this and that and go down like that. So we make it a little bit more attractive. And although the back is up against a wall, we could even take that and cut that in a bit, just because if you see that from the side, it might be a little bit more aesthetically pleasing than just a straight line. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw out on a piece of cardboard something that looks like this, that's about the right height, and that's going to be about 36, 40 inches, something like that. And the width is going to be about 12 inches. And I'm just going to freehand draw something and see what it looks like. So there's the wooden template that I've come out with, and it was a little tedious to make that because I had to round that off and sand it and make the bumps and just kind of smooth it out a bit. I used a belt sander here and there, but that's what it looks like, and I'm pretty happy with that now. That will be our template, and that will be for either side. So now all we need to do is find our wood and start laying this out. I found this nice piece of knotty pine. It's actually, they sell it as pine shelving, but if you hand pick through it, you can get some pretty nice boards. So I'm going to use that one, and I've measured our pattern, and it's 36 inches long. It's perfect, so I'll easily get 2 cuts on here and maybe more. So off to the sliding miter. Now I've cut our 2 pieces, and there they are, but now I want to show you something. And that is, and I knew this before we started, that the template that I cut wants to be a foot, 12 inches deep. But look at that, the wood that we cut is actually short, and it's short by about ½ an inch. So here's a woodworker's trick that we've used for a long time. Rather than running out and buying another board that in this case would be, you know, another ½ inch thick, what we do is sometimes we can take pieces right from a board like this, we can cut them out here and glue them, and very successfully glue them to the end here. But in this case, what I'm going to do, because we have a little bit of wood left over, and I wanted to make sure that we did that even before I started, this has got some nice clear strips on it that I'm going to take off, and I'm going to glue those on to this so that we have a nice thick piece of wood to work with. Now we always want to make sure we're working with nice clean edges when we're doing glue ups. Now in the scheme of things, this is a pretty easy glue up, but I want to show you a couple things. First of all, you might be able to see this plastic that I've laid all the way across here, and it's just that very thin, almost like it's a packing plastic, and I use that so that the wood doesn't touch the metal parts here, because when you do that, you often get a black stain from the iron, the glue reacting with the iron. So that's a little trick that we do. The other thing, I have a lot of people asking me about my mustard glue bottle, and the simple answer to that one is that I buy glue in bulk. These mustard bottles work great. They're easy to clean. All glue bottles will get clogged up at some time or other, and these are just as easy to unclog as any of them. Well, that's a couple of hours. Let's quickly have a look at this and see what this looks like. There we go. And that's looking good. Okay, what we need to do now is we need to trim these ends off a little bit. Then we'll come back here and we'll lay out the template and we'll draw around that and we'll start cutting that out. Now in order to draw around this, mainly what you want to make sure of is that this is flat at the bottom, because this is 90 degrees here, and then the ends should line up as well. And that looks like that right about there. And now all I'm going to do is just take a pencil and draw a nice heavy line around this so that we can then we could either use a jigsaw or we could use a bandsaw. In this case I'm going to use the bandsaw, but if you don't have a bandsaw, you could easily use a jigsaw. Would work just fine on this. Now we want to do this slowly because we want to go as close to the line as we can without going over it. As you can see, we've cut out the shapes of our quilt racks, but we still need to do some finishing on them. But I want to do something a little bit more unique with this. I don't want to just leave it as a quilt rack. So what we're going to do, we're going to cut a little heart in here to add just a little bit of decoration to it. And I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. Now, hole saws come in all sorts of different sizes, and we found one that we thought was suitable. But here's what we're going to do. Now, if you don't have a hole saw, of course you can just drill a hole and cut it out with a jigsaw or a scroll saw or whatever you have. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to take our hole saw And because we're using a 1.5 inch, we know there's going to be a hole here and another hole here, and they're going to be 1.5 inches apart. And what we'll do is we'll drill a hole like this in one side of the wood, then we'll drill another hole like this in the other side of the wood, and that will give us the basis of our little heart. Because all we need to do then is take a jigsaw or a scroll saw or even some kind of a hand saw and cut that out, and that will give us a heart. So there's our 2 holes. Well, there's our 3 holes. These are the 2 that we're going to be drilling out, and I'm going to have to stop after the first one because the plug will end up in here. So I'll have to stop, undo this, take the plug out, and then we'll do the second one. Okay, now we'll cut out the rest. The quick and easy way of cutting those hearts out the rest of the way is just with a jigsaw, or what some people call a saber saw. So that's what we're going to do. There's our heart. Now I've set the height of the router bit so that the bottom is just flush with the table. Now I need to move the fence in, and the fence needs to be flush with the top. So we use a ruler to what we call isolate the bearing, and that's to make it all flush all the way across so that we're Now I'm going to round over the front and the back of both the gable ends, including our little heart that we put in there. And to do that, I'm back on the router table again. And again, you could use a trim router if you have that. You could even sand that by hand. It's just to take the edge off. I'm just using a tool to do it, but it could easily be done by hand. Now I'm doing it on the router table, and I'm using something called a starter pin, and I'll show you a close-up of that in a second. And that's what the starter pin looks like. It just pops in. There's a little hole on most router tables, and that's all it looks like. It's not threaded. It just drops into a little hole like that, locks down, and then it's used like that just to ease onto the bit. So let's get started. After we do the layouts on the gable ends, what we're going to do is we're going to use this Forstner bit, and wherever we've marked, we're going to drill a hole like this. And we will be using these little pins. First of all, we'll drill a pilot hole through that, and you can see that it actually leaves a place where we can put the next drill bit in, and then we'll put the screw in, we'll drive the screw in, and when we're finished, we'll put these little buttons. We'll actually glue these little buttons in. Now I put a mark on there with a felt pen so that I know that I don't go below that line. Now it's time to put the little buttons on, and I'm just putting a tab, just a little dab of glue on each one, and then seating it. It's mostly being held in by the friction. Can't even get it in. And that's what the little buttons look like. I think they give a nice finished look to that. So I'll just do the other side and we'll be ready to start finishing this. Okay, I've selected the stain that I'm going to use on this project, and it's a darker color, and the reason I selected a darker color is because I don't want the stand to take away from the quilts. The whole purpose of making the stand is for a place to display quilts. And if you make something that's really fancy, then people will start looking at the stand instead of the quilts. And that's not the purpose. Well, we've let our stain dry, and now we're going to put a top coat on, a clear coat on. In this case, I'm using a Varathane. It's a water-based clear covering, and this is a satin, so it won't be a real high gloss. And the reason I'm using this is two reasons. It dries very quickly, so I'll be able to put 2 or 3 coats on in a day, depending on the temperature, but also it dries very hard, and we want to make sure that we cover the stain because we're going to be putting, in some cases we could be putting some very expensive quilts on a rack like this, and we don't want any of the stain to come off on the quilts. Well, this concludes our build on making the little quilt rack. And you can see as I spin it around, there's a nice sheen to it. We've got 3 coats of satin water-based Varathane on here, and that will nicely protect the quilt so that there's not going to get any stain or anything on them. Easy to clean, and it just looks great, and it's not going to take away from the quilts. This kind of item is something that could even be considered a cottage industry. You know, there are thousands of quilters who are looking for places to store, show off, and just to hang their quilts on. And this is exactly the kind of thing that they're looking for. They don't want something that's too showy, that's going to take away from their quilts, but still something that's good and sturdy and is going to be not terribly expensive. And that's why we did this build, was because it was something that was a little bit more simple, but still something highly functional and something that a lot of people could use. So, I'm Colin Canet for WoodWorkWeb. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and stay tuned for our next videos.